The air was thick with the acrid scent of decay, the remnants of a civilization now all but wiped out. What had once been bustling cities were now silent graveyards, where the echoes of the past could only be heard in the wind that whipped through empty streets and shattered glass. The Necro-7 virus had spread like wildfire, decimating populations in record time. It didn't discriminate, claimed the young, the old, the strong, and the weak alike. Only a handful of people had managed to survive, and they were now scattered. Struggling to make sense of a world turned upside down, Lena Carter stood on the roof of a dilapidated building, overlooking what used to be a vibrant city center. The once proud skyline was now reduced to jagged, broken shapes, shadows of their former selves. The streets below were eerily empty, except for the occasional scavenger or desperate survivor looking for food and supplies. Lena tightened her grip on the binoculars she held, her eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of life. Any clues that might lead her to the answers she so desperately needed. She had been living like this for months alone, resourceful and careful. Her immunity to the virus was her only advantage. Years of research had made her one of the few humans untouched by Necro-7. At first, the isolation had been manageable, even peaceful. But as the weeks turned to months, the loneliness had begun to gnaw at her. The world outside her small refuge was dying. And no matter how many survival tactics she employed, no matter how many makeshift shelters she built, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she was supposed to do. A sudden crackling sound came from her small, makeshift radio, breaking her reverie. Lena's hand shot out to turn the dial. The static finally gave way to a voice, low, distorted, and almost unrecognizable. "Lena Carter." "We know you're out there," the voice said, sending a shiver down her spine. "We've been watching. The bunker is your only hope. You must come." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard that name in months. The bunker, a secret government facility buried deep beneath the earth, rumored to contain the cure for the virus. It had been lost. Its exact location buried with the collapse of society. Yet here it was, mentioned again like a lifeline in a world of darkness. Lena knew what this meant. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew she was alive, and they were offering her a way out of the nightmare. A way to stop the virus once and for all. But could she trust the message? Who was behind it? And why was she, of all people, being singled out? For a moment, doubt crept in, but the thought of a cure, the possibility of saving humanity, was too tempting, too necessary. If there was a chance, no matter how slim, she had to take it. Lena pulled the radio closer to her ear, trying to decipher the message. It was broken and garbled, but one thing was clear. It had coordinates. Coordinates to the hidden bunker. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a breath. This wasn't just a mission, it was a chance to make a difference. The weight of the world, of her own survival, had slowly crushed her spirit. But now there was hope. For a fleeting moment, she let herself believe that this was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. The chance to end the nightmare. She quickly gathered her things. A rifle, a few supplies, and a rugged backpack. She knew she couldn't make this journey alone. The world was a dangerous place now, and any wrong turn could be fatal. But she couldn't wait. If she hesitated, the opportunity would slip away. Lena had learned to trust her instincts. Grabbing a map she had scrawled out months ago from memory, she traced the coordinates with her finger. It was a long way off, across dangerous terrain, through infected zones and hostile survivors. She didn't know who she could trust anymore, but there was no time to waste. If the virus kept spreading at the rate it had been, there wouldn't be much left to save. Lena slung the bag over her shoulder, looking out over the city one last time. She could feel the familiar pang of loss. The city that had once been alive with people, with possibilities, was now silent. But the time for mourning was over. With a final glance, She turned and disappeared into the shadows of the abandoned building. Her path set and her mind focused. She would find the bunker. And she would bring the cure back, no matter what it took. The journey would be perilous, filled with obstacles, both human and infected. But Lena Carter had survived too much already to back down now. The world was on the brink of collapse, but perhaps, just perhaps, she was humanity's last hope, and she would not let it slip away. Lena had been traveling for 2 days, moving cautiously through the ruins of what was once a thriving metropolis. The city, once home to millions, now stood as a ghost of its former self. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the soft crunch of debris beneath her boots. She could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She was one of the last of her kind, immune to the virus that had claimed so many lives. The thought both comforted and tortured her. What did it mean to be alive in a world like this? And, more importantly, what could she do with the knowledge that she was one of the few who might hold the key to saving humanity? The world around her was a maze of crumbling buildings and decaying infrastructure. Yet it was also strangely beautiful in its stillness. Else, nature was slowly reclaiming the landvines wrapped around abandoned cars. Wildflowers sprouted through cracks in the pavement, and birds had returned to their nests in the hollowed-out remains of skyscrapers. It was as though the earth had begun to heal itself, but humanity was no longer a part of the equation. She paused for a moment, taking a sip of water from her canteen and checking her map again. The coordinates on the radio had led her here, to what was once a military zone just outside the city. The buildings were fortified, remnants of what had been the government's last-ditch effort to contain the virus. Lena's stomach twisted at the thought. She couldn't help but wonder how many lives had been lost in these places. How? Many had died hoping for a solution that had never come. Her mind shifted back to the cryptic message she'd received. She had no idea who had sent it, but the urgency, in their words, felt real. She had no choice but to follow the trail. There was no going back now. As she moved deeper into the military zone, the landscape grew even more desolate. Lena could make out the remains of old barricades, rusted and broken, as if they had once held back a tide of infected. She knew that most of the military bases had long since fallen. The infection had spread too quickly for any kind of defense to hold, and the survivors who remained were often more dangerous than the infected themselves. Lena was reminded of her time in the research labs, the projects she had worked on before everything had fallen apart. She had once believed in the work, the promise that science could save the world. But now, all she had were the memories of failures and mistakes. She had no idea how or why she had become immune, but it wasn't something she could explain. The only thing she could do now was try to use it to save what was left of humanity. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie orange glow across the horizon, Lena noticed movement in the distance, a faint silhouette, perhaps 2 or 3 figures, creeping along the edge of the decimated city. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle slung over her shoulder. She had been alone for so long that the sight of other survivors sent a surge of caution through her veins. In a world like this, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She ducked behind a crumbling wall, taking cover. The figures appeared to be scavengers, people who, like her, were simply trying to survive. But survival in this world often meant more than just avoiding the virus. It meant avoiding the violent and unpredictable behavior of other survivors. Lena waited, watching them carefully through the cracked window of an old building. Her pulse quickened as one of the figures looked her way. Her breath caught in her throat, but the figure didn't seem to notice. They moved on, disappearing into the distance. Lena exhaled slowly. The last thing she wanted was to attract attention, especially from those who might not be as friendly as they seemed. She continued her journey, the setting sun casting long shadows across the broken city. Her destination was still ahead, and despite the dangers, Lena pushed forward with renewed determination. The message had been clear. There was a chance, however slim, to find the bunker and maybe cure the virus. The night was falling fast, and with it, the temperature dropped. Lena found a small, abandoned shelter and set up camp. She was exhausted, her body sore from the constant movement, but she had no choice. The journey was only beginning. There were still days of travel ahead, and every moment could mean the difference between survival and death. But she couldn't let fear stop her. Too many people had already died. Too many had given up without hope. Lena's fingers brushed against the vial of serum she kept tucked into her backpack. Her immunity had been a fluke, a side effect of an experiment gone wrong, but it was the only thing that could make a difference now. If she could reach the bunker, maybe she could synthesize the cure that would save the world. The thought kept her going, even as the darkness outside deepened and the sounds of the broken world seemed to close in around her. In the distance, the faint hum of machinery echoed, a reminder that the virus was only one of the threats she had to face. But Lena awoke to the harsh light of early morning. The dim glow of the sun fighting its way through the cracks in the shelter's ceiling. She had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The bunker, the cure, the key to saving humanity was all within reach. But it was still a long way off, and every step brought its own dangers. She packed her things quickly, stowing the last of her rations and securing her rifle. She couldn't afford to linger in one place for too long. As Lena emerged from the shelter, she was met with the stark reality of the world she was now navigating. The city had once been a hub of commerce and life, but now it was just a decaying monument to what humanity had lost. Abandoned cars sat like forgotten relics, their rusting frames half buried under overgrowth. The roads, cracked and fractured from the weight of time, led nowhere. The old highway stretched out before her, but there was no guarantee it would take her where she needed to go. She checked the map once again. The coordinates from the mysterious message had been precise. But the landscape had changed so much that nothing looked familiar anymore. The roads were filled with debris, the signs, once marking safe passages, now obscured by the rubble. Lena had no choice but to rely on her instincts and the few landmarks she could recognize from her previous trips as she moved forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The quiet was oppressive, as though the world itself was holding its breath. She paused for a moment, scanning the area. There was nothing, no movement, no sounds, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Survivors, she had encountered them before. Scavengers. Desperate and often dangerous, willing to do anything to stay alive. But these survivors weren't just any ordinary bandits. They were the type that had been formed in the crucible of desperation. Some had become twisted versions of the people they had once been. Others had lost their humanity entirely. Lena pressed on, her eyes sharp and alert. She had learned to be quiet, to move without leaving a trace. But that wasn't always enough. The infected weren't the only threat anymore. The virus had turned people into something else, survivalists who no longer adhered to any moral code. Every decision had a price now. And Lena wasn't sure if she could afford it as she crossed a bridge over a dried-up riverbed. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A figure in the distance, a shadow crossing her path. Lena froze, gripping the rifle tighter. It could be another survivor or something far worse. She ducked behind a crumbling pillar and waited. The figure moved closer, and Lena's breath caught in her throat when she realized it was a woman. Her clothes were tattered, her face gaunt, and her eyes hollow with hunger. She was alone, but there was a wildness in her step that made Lena wary. The woman passed within mere feet of Lena's hiding spot, her steps erratic and uncertain. She didn't seem to notice Lena at all. her gaze fixed on something distant. Something Lena couldn't see. The tension in Lena's chest loosened slightly, but she didn't relax. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. These were lessons she had learned the hard way. The last thing she needed was to be caught in a confrontation. She waited until the woman had moved far enough away before she slipped back onto the road. Movements silent and quick. Hours passed as she trudged through the barren landscape. Her body ached, but she pushed through. The shelter had been a brief respite, but the journey was still long. Her mind kept returning to the message to the coordinates, the bunker. Whoever had sent it, they had known about her immunity. But how and why had they waited so long to reach out? As she neared the outskirts of the military zone marked on her map, she spotted something that made her stop dead in her tracks. A cluster of old military vehicles, half buried under dirt and time. They were mostly rusted husks now, but they had once been part of the government's last-ditch effort to contain the virus. The vehicles were positioned in a defensive formation, pointing outward as if expecting an enemy to attack. But the enemy hadn't come. The virus had done what no army ever could. Lena approached cautiously, wary of any remaining threats. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find here, but as she examined the vehicles, she spotted something that made her heart race. An old military radio, buried beneath debris, the rusted antenna poking out from the dirt. Her hands trembled slightly as she knelt down to pull it free. The device was heavy and old, but the thought of a working radio was enough to give her hope. After a few minutes of fiddling with the controls, Lena managed to get the radio to power on, the static crackling to life. She felt a surge of excitement, but tempered it with caution. The last thing she wanted was to attract attention. But if this radio worked, it could be the key to uncovering more about the bunker's location. Maybe, just maybe, she could get the answers she needed. She adjusted the frequency, fingers trembling with anticipation, but the only sound that came through was the same distorted crackling. Then, suddenly, a voice pierced through the static. "Lena, is this you?" Heart skipped a beat. It was a voice she didn't recognize, but the message was clear. The realization hit Lena like a jolt of electricity. Someone was out there. Someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was trying to do. But the questions swirled in her mind faster than she could process them. How had they found her? And what did they want? For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena felt a spark of hope. But she knew better than to trust too easily. In this world, The voice crackled again, clearer this time, a hint of urgency in the tone. "Lena, you need to listen carefully. The bunker is real. It's not just a rumor. It's the last hope." Lena's heart raced, her fingers tightening on the radio's rusted dials. The words felt like a lifeline hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for months. "Who are you?" Lena asked, her voice calm despite the rush of emotions flooding her chest. "Why have you been watching me? How do you know where I am?" There was a brief silence before the voice responded, its tone hesitant, almost apologetic. "I can't explain everything now, but we've been tracking your movements for a long time. You're one of the few who are still immune. We need you to reach the bunker. It's a government facility, one of the last ones standing. We've been trying to access it for months, but the path is too dangerous." Lena's eyes narrowed as the words sank in. "We?" she asked. "Who's we?" The voice hesitated again, as if grappling with something important. Finally, it replied, "A group of survivors. Scientists, former military, and others who are trying to rebuild. We're not just looking for a cure. We want to restart humanity, Lena, but we can't do it without you." Lena took a steadying breath. She had always worked alone. Trusting others, especially in a world like this, was a luxury she couldn't afford. But the words from the voice haunted her. Rebuild humanity. It was a thought she had only dared entertain in her darkest moments. And now, it seemed, someone was offering her the chance to be part of something bigger than survival. "How do you know I'm immune?" Lena asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. There was a long pause, and then the voice responded, its tone softer, almost sorrowful. "We were monitoring the outbreak from the beginning. Your lab, the experiments you were/roommates. You were working on everything was recorded. We have the data, Lena. We know what happened. We know the virus didn't take you because of the work you did, the research. You were exposed, more than once. But your immunity, it's a side effect of something we still don't fully understand." Lena's chest tightened. The work, right? The experiments, they had always been classified, even to her. A part of her had always wondered whether the virus was the result of something she had done in the lab, an unintended consequence of the research. But hearing it out loud, hearing how they knew about her exposure, felt like a violation. Still, the bigger question loomed. "Why her? Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The response was almost too quiet to hear. "Because you're the only one left who can help us. The virus, it's mutating. The original strain is no longer the biggest threat. It's evolving, Lena. What you're carrying in your blood. It's the last hope for finding a cure. If we can synthesize what's in your system, we can reverse the mutation, stop it from spreading any further. We'll have a fighting chance." The weight of the words settled heavily on Lena's shoulders. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the key to humanity's future. And the thought of having that much responsibility, being the fulcrum on which everything balanced, terrified her. But there was no going back. The world was dying, and the fate of everything rested on the next few steps she took. "I don't trust you," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremble in her gut. "How do I know this is real? How do I know you're not just trying to manipulate me?" The voice sighed softly, as though it had expected the question. "We don't have time for games, Lena. The virus is already mutating in ways we didn't expect. We've lost entire settlements because of it. The bunker is the only place that has the resources we need to stabilize the situation. The coordinates I gave you, follow them. When you get there, you'll understand. But you have to move quickly. There's no time left." Lena's mind raced. Every instinct she had screamed at her to turn away, to reject the offer and continue on her own. She had lived this long because she trusted no one, relied only on her ability to survive. But there was something in the voice, something in the urgency of the words, that made her pause. If they were telling the truth, if there was really a chance to stop this nightmare, how could she not take it? "I'll go," Lena said finally, the weight of her decision pressing down on her chest. "But if this is a trap, I swear we'll be there when you arrive." The voice interrupted, almost as though it had read her thoughts. "Just get to the bunker, Lena. The world is depending on you." Lena ended the transmission, the radio falling. Silent once more. The words of the mysterious voice still echoed in her mind. "The world is depending on you." The realization hit Lena like a jolt of electricity. Someone was out there. Someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was trying to do. But the questions swirled in her mind faster than she could process. Them. How had they found her, and what did they want? For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena felt a spark of hope. But she knew better than to trust too easily. In this world, no one was safe, least of all those who held the cure. Shaking her head, Lena focused on the task ahead. She couldn't afford to second-guess herself now. The bunker was closer than it had ever been. She had a map, a goal, and a single sliver of hope. She had no idea who these people were or whether they could be trusted. But one thing was clear. Time was running out. And she was the only one who could stop the virus from spreading. With a deep breath, Lena grabbed her rifle and began moving again. The path to the bunker was still uncertain, but she knew now that she couldn't turn back. Lena's mind was consumed with 1,000 thoughts as she trekked through the desolate wasteland. The radio transmission had been brief, and despite her resolve, uncertainty gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. The bunker was within reach, but what lay beyond it? Were the people who had contacted her truly humanity's last hope? Or were they another group of survivors with hidden agendas? And most unsettling of all, was her immunity truly the cure they claimed it was? Or was it just another piece of the puzzle they were using for their own gain? She brushed her hand across the scarred surface of a crumbling building, her fingers brushing against something that felt like the last remnants of a forgotten world. The sky overhead was gray, an eternal overcast that blocked the sun and bathed everything in a dull, lifeless hue. Every step she took was deliberate, every breath measured. She couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. The road to the bunker was narrow, winding through old industrial areas, their once bustling factories, now little more than rusting husks of metal and concrete. Lena had seen remnants of this world before, but every time it seemed to grow more alien. The past, her past, felt like a distant memory, a ghost she could no longer grasp. Her pulse quickened as she passed another decaying building. The air seemed to thicken, and a strange unease crept into her chest. She stopped, listening intently. There was no sound, no birds, no wind, nothing to suggest life. The world felt abandoned, as if it had ceased to exist long before the virus ever spread. Then, faintly, she heard it, a low, distant rumble. Her heart skipped a beat. It was too soft to be thunder, too irregular to be anything natural. Lena instinctively crouched behind a concrete pillar, her rifle held close. She listened again. The sound was closer now, and it carried with it, haunting rhythm, footsteps. Not just one pair, but several, at least 5, maybe more. Her eyes darted to the horizon, but there was nothing in sight, no movement, no figures. The world around her was still, but the sound was undeniable. Lena's instincts flared. She knew what this meant. The survivors, the ones who had turned feral, were close. Her grip tightened around the rifle as she moved cautiously toward the edge of the building. Her heart beat faster now, not just from fear, but from the edge of desperation. The bunker was only a few miles away, but these scavengers could make it impossible for her to reach it. She scanned the area, her sharp eyes catching fleeting glimpses of movement in the distance. It was hard to tell who or what they were. Shadows at the periphery of her vision, darting in and out of her line of sight. But there was no mistaking the danger they posed. These weren't ordinary survivors. They were hunters. Lena swallowed, crouching lower, every muscle in her body coiled tight. There was no way she could take them on, not with the odds stacked so heavily against her. Her only chance was to slip past them unnoticed. She waited for the right moment, watching the shifting figures as they moved closer. They were speaking now, but their voices were muffled by the distance. It didn't matter. Lena didn't need to hear them. She just needed to get to the bunker. Minutes passed like hours. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Lena's breath caught in her throat, but she kept herself steady. As the figures neared, she took a deep breath, crouched low, and began to move slow, deliberate. Like a shadow in the dark, she slipped through the wreckage of an old warehouse, using the debris to mask her movements. Her senses were heightened, every nerve on edge as she crept through the maze of steel and stone. The scavengers were close now, just a few yards away. Their voices were distinct, their harsh words punctuated by laughter that sent chills crawling up her spine. They were getting closer, and the opportunity to slip past was slipping away. Lena pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, holding her breath. Her rifle was poised, ready, but she knew it wasn't an option. One shot would draw them all. To her, it would be over before she had a chance to run. The scavengers passed by, unaware of her presence. Lena remained perfectly still, waiting for the echo of their footsteps to fade into the distance. The tension in her body was almost unbearable, but she forced herself to stay calm. To stay quiet, it took what felt like an eternity before the last sound of their footsteps finally disappeared. Only then did Lena allow herself to exhale, her body relaxing from the tight coil it had become. She waited a few more moments, ensuring they were truly gone before continuing on her path. With every step, the bunker loomed larger in her mind. The coordinates on the map still held, like a beacon. In the darkness, she had to reach it. It was the only chance, the only hope she had left. But as she continued down the path, the nagging feeling in the back of her mind didn't fade. The world had changed. People had changed. Even if she made it to the bunker, she couldn't escape the truth. Nothing would ever be the same. The virus wasn't the only thing humanity had to fight. The worst threat might not be the infection, but what it had done to the people who survived it. Lena gripped her rifle tighter, forcing herself to keep moving. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. Whatever awaited her in the bunker, whatever the truth was. Lena's steps were calculated now, each footfall cautious, deliberate. The wind had picked up, carrying with it a faint metallic scent that made her pause. There was something off in the air, something that wasn't right. She glanced at the map again, the lines drawn on the old, torn paper leading her to the coordinates she had memorized. Only a few miles more, she told herself, trying to push away the gnawing discomfort that had settled deep in her chest. The world around her was eerily silent again. No sounds of distant animals or even the hum of technology. The world felt empty, hollowed out. Her only company was the constant sound of her own breathing and the soft rustling of debris underfoot. As she moved forward, the remnants of what had once been a thriving city loomed on the horizon, their skeletal forms rising out of the dust like grave markers for a civilization that had fallen. It was strange how the structures seemed almost too perfect in their decayed towers and skyscrapers still standing tall. But everything around them was deathly still. Lena had been walking for what seemed like hours. When she reached the base of a massive hill, the ground beneath her rough and jagged. She glanced up. There, nestled between two crumbling towers, was a narrow gap in the earth, a dark opening, barely visible but unmistakable. The bunker? It had to be Dot, with the weight of that realization hanging over her. Lena's pace quickened. Every step now felt more urgent than the last. She wasn't sure what awaited her on the other side of the threshold, but she was certain of one thing: she couldn't afford to hesitate. Humanity's fate rested on what she did next. The entrance to the bunker was hidden beneath a tangle of overgrown vines and collapsed stone. Lena pushed the debris aside with practiced ease, exposing a heavy steel door engraved with symbols she didn't recognize. Her fingers ran over the rusted surface, searching for any indication of how to open it. She had no idea how to operate something like this. These doors were designed to keep people in, not let them out. But she was running out of time. She heard a noiseless soft click, followed by a dull hum from within the structure. The door groaned as if in protest, but it slowly started to open, revealing a pitch-black corridor beyond. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying the scent of rust and something else, something unnatural. Lena hesitated, just for a moment. The bunker wasn't just a place of refuge. It was a fortress built to withstand everything the world had thrown at it. But this place felt off. It felt empty. Her gut told her to turn back. But the fate of the world, of everything she had known, was within this darkened chamber. With a deep breath, she stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her with a resounding bang that echoed through the narrow passage. The sudden silence pressed in on her, making her ears ring. It was hard to see anything in the dim light, and she could feel the weight of her footsteps reverberating in the stillness. The temperature was noticeably colder here, a sharp contrast to the sweltering heat of the outside world. She moved slowly, her hand brushing against the cold metal walls as she navigated through the dark corridor. It twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the heart of the facility. There were no sounds of movement, no voices, nothing that would suggest that anyone was here. The bunker was supposed to be full of life, of people working together to find a cure, to rebuild. But this place felt deserted. Lena's breath quickened, a sense of unease clawing at her chest. She had never expected this to be easy, but she hadn't imagined walking into a ghost town. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave the bunker and run. But then she heard Ida. Faint buzzing sound, low and mechanical, echoing from somewhere deep inside the complex. It wasn't human, it was mechanical, like the hum of old generators or systems trying to boot up. Her pulse quickened, the sound grew louder. And as she rounded another corner, she finally saw it. A large, dimly lit room filled with old monitors, flickering and sparking. In the center of the room stood a figure, hunched over a set of terminals. Their back to Lena. They seemed to be absorbed in their work, their movements slow, deliberate. "Hello." Lena called out, her voice shaking slightly. It had been so long since she'd spoken to anyone, and the words felt foreign on her tongue. The figure didn't respond. Lena hesitated for a moment, but something about the scene felt wrong. The figure, if they were humans, should have heard her, should have reacted. But they remained motionless. Her eyes darted to the rows of monitors, their screens filled with static and flickering data. Some of the screens were cracked, others completely blank. The silence stretched on, almost unbearable now. "Are you there?" Lena repeated, her voice louder this time, a touch more desperate. There was a shift in the figure's posture. They turned slowly, as if the very act of movement required too much effort. And when their face came into view, Lena's blood ran. Cold, it wasn't a person at all. The face was human, but there was something wrong, to pale, to still. The eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused. There was no recognition in them, no spark of life. The figure was a shell, a living corpse. "Who? What are you?" Lena whispered, backing away instinctively. The figure's mouth moved, but there were no words, only a low, guttural sound, as if it was trying to speak through layers of static. Its hand reached for something on the terminal, pulling up a faded Imagia map, like the one she had used to find her way here, and then a horrifying realization struck her. The figure wasn't just a survivor. It was the result of the virus. It had mutated, and whatever was happening here, whatever this bunker had become, it wasn't the sanctuary she had hoped for. It was a trap. Lena's hand instinctively reached for her rifle as she took a step back, her mind racing. Lena's heart pounded as she stepped back further into the shadows. Every instinct screaming at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. Figure no. The thing stared at her with its glassy, dead eyes. A shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't human anymore. Whatever the virus had done, it had twisted this person into something unrecognizable. The image of their pale face burned into her mind, the slow, jerking movements like some kind of puppet on strings. For a moment, the air was thick with tension. Neither of them moved. The low hum from the terminal filled the room, the screens, flashing disjointed images. Lena's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. She was about to turn and flee when a new sound cut through the silence, heavy, metallic footsteps. The door at the far end of the room creaked open. Lena froze. Her hand gripped the rifle, but she didn't raise it. She couldn't. Not yet. Whatever was coming wasn't the same as the creature before her. It was far too purposeful. She could hear it moving closer, and it wasn't just one thing. It was more. From the corner of her eye, Lena saw the figure shuffle toward the far wall, as if compelled by something she couldn't understand. The figure's eyes flicked to the door. There was a glimmer of recognition there, like a forgotten spark of life. A terrifying thought struck her. It knows what's coming. The door creaked open wider, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. The figures entering were not like the one before her. They moved with purpose, their steps controlled, their eyes clear at least. For the moment, it was as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Lena's eyes darted to the side, and her fingers went white from gripping the rifle. She had no idea how many of them there were, but the room had just become a whole lot more dangerous. Her mind ran through every possibility. They weren't here to rescue her. They were here because they had been expecting her. The figures stepped into view, their clothing tattered but functional, their faces grim. They were survivors, but not the kind Lena had ever hoped to find. These were soldiers, scientists perhaps, but all of them seemed ... broken. Hardened. The virus had taken something from them. To Lena, one of them spoke, his voice gravelly and strained. He had a scar running down his cheek, and his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much. "We've been waiting for you." Lena didn't lower her rifle. "Who the hell are you?" He took a step forward, but not too quickly. His hands remained visible, as if to show he meant no immediate harm, though his eyes never left hers. "We've been trying to fix it. The virus, the mutation. It's not just a disease anymore," he said, his voice full of a quiet despair. "It's a weapon." Lena's mind buzzed with confusion. "What do you mean? A weapon?" The man glanced at the creature on the other side of the room, the one that had been staring at her. The creature's face was still emotionless, its eyes glazed. But it had stopped moving for the moment. It started as a cure. The man continued, his voice softening as he looked back to Lena. "At least, that's what we thought. We were trying to eradicate the virus, prevent it from mutating into something deadly. But it adapted, became self-aware. Now it's..." He paused, visibly struggling with the words. "It's evolving. It's no longer just a virus. It's controlling them, infecting their minds." Lena took a deep breath, piecing together the fragmented words. "The bunker. You built it to stop the virus, but instead, you've turned it into a breeding ground for it." The man shook his head. "No, Lena, we didn't know. We didn't expect this. The virus is using us. It's like a parasite. And now, it's evolved beyond anything we've ever seen. The creatures here, they're the first generation of its kind. And there are more, just like it." Lena's eyes darted to the monitors again, where data flickered in and out. The pictures, the graphs, they were all incomplete, the numbers failing to give any coherent explanation. It was all coming together, but she wasn't sure she liked the picture it painted. "Why did you contact me?" she asked, still holding her rifle, but now with a different kind of tension. The situation was far worse than she had imagined. It was clear that these survivors, these people, were just as much at the mercy of the virus as she had been. The man didn't answer right away. He glanced back at the creature that had been watching Lena with unsettling intensity. "We need you," he said. "You're immune. You're the key. The virus... It knows what you are. Your blood, your immunity, it's the only thing that can stop it from completing its transformation." Lena felt a pang of disbelief. "You want me to help you stop this?" She gestured toward the undead creature on the other side of the room, now starting to twitch and shuffle again, its vacant eyes locked onto her. The man nodded, his expression tight. "If we don't stop it now, Lena... the virus will be beyond our control. It's mutating rapidly. If it learns how to spread, humanity won't survive. The creatures you see, they're just the beginning. They're the first wave. A cold chill ran through Lena's body. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, suffocating her. The virus wasn't just something that could be contained anymore. It was a new form of life. A deadly, intelligent force that sought to destroy everything. Lena stared at the man, the weight of his words sinking in. The bunker wasn't a refuge. It was the epicenter of the storm. It's the very place where the last battle would be fought, and she was the one who had to fight it. "I'll help," Lena said, her voice steely and resolved, despite the fear gnawing at her. "But we do this my way." The man didn't argue. He only nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet gratitude that spoke volumes. Lena's heart raced as she stood in the dimly lit control room, surrounded by monitors flashing cryptic data and machinery that hummed with an unsettling life of its own. The air felt thick, pressing in from all sides. The man who had spoken. To her, Captain Rowe stood beside her, his eyes flicking back to the group of survivors who had gathered behind them. There was no turning back now. The bunker's complex system of metal walls and forgotten corridors had become a claustrophobic labyrinth, a maze of old secrets and newer horrors. The walls were lined with outdated machinery, all of it still operating. On a skeletal system of power barely functional, but functional enough to sustain what was left of humanity's most desperate hope. "The virus is evolving too fast," Rowe muttered, staring at the screens before them. "If we don't act now, it'll spread beyond this bunker. We're talking global contamination, more intelligent, more deadly." Lena clenched her jaw. "What do you need me to do?" Rowe's eyes met hers, his gaze intense. "The cure your immunities encoded into your blood. We need to replicate it. Extract the viral antibodies from your system and isolate them. The process will take time, and there's no telling how long you'll survive once we begin. Linus." Stomach twisted. She had known the stakes, but hearing them out loud in cold clinical terms made it all the more real. Her immunity wasn't just a safeguard, was the only hope. And yet, it felt like she was being asked to sacrifice the last piece of herself to save humanity. "Where do we begin?" she asked, swallowing the lump in her throat. Rowe gestured toward the central chamber, a room on the far side of the bunker, where a large advanced machine hummed. Its purpose was clear. This was the laboratory where the final experiment would take place. Lena followed him, each step heavier than the last. They passed through hallways, now more eerily quiet, the once bustling facility now reduced to shadows and whispers of what it had once been. The distant hum of the creature still echoed through the walls, its presence ever looming. As they entered the lab, the sight that greeted her was far more unsettling than she had imagined. There were medical tables lined up, their cold surfaces reflecting harsh overhead lights and sterile instruments neatly arranged on shelves. But it wasn't the equipment that caught Lena's attention, it was the faces of the others. Survivors, all watching her with a mix of desperation and fear. "You're the last hope." One of the scientists, Dr. Kwan, spoke quietly. She was a middle-aged woman, her face haggard and pale from months of working in the facility. She pulled a needle from a tray, her eyes trained on Lena. "You're the key to stopping it. Without you, we don't have a chance." Lena nodded, her resolve firming. "Let's get it over with." Rowe gave her a hard look. "There's no going back from this, Lena. We're not sure how your body will react once we begin the process. There may be complications." "Complications," Lena repeated, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of complications. If I'm going to die trying to stop this, then I'm willing to take that risk." The room fell silent at her words. No one spoke for a long moment, and for the first time since entering the bunker, Lena felt the weight of their eyes on her, not just with hope, but with something deeper, something that echoed a collective, fearful resignation. Dr. Kwan moved to Lena's side and motioned for her to lie on the examination table. As Lena reclined, her heart pounded in her chest. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the lab suddenly felt suffocating. She glanced at the others, Ro Kwan and a handful of scientists all standing by, waiting for the procedure to begin. Her thoughts flashed back to the early days of the outbreak, when the world had seemed so much larger, filled with endless possibilities. Now, it was all coming down to this moment. Her immunity was humanity's last chance. And as much as she wanted to run, as much as the fear gnawed at her, Lena knew this was the only path left. Dr. Kwan's gloved hands carefully attached the needle to a syringe, and Lena braced herself as the first vial of blood was drawn. The sharp sting of the needle was fleeting, but the weight of what was happening pressed heavily on her chest. She could feel it, the sudden pull of her very life force being siphoned into the cold, sterile container. The room was still, the air thick with tension as Dr. Kwan worked swiftly. Lena's vision blurred for a moment, and she closed her eyes, the darkness swallowing her whole. She felt like a spectator in her own body, watching as the process continued, her blood being extracted, her hope, her immunity, becoming the focal point of the world's salvation. As the final vial was filled, Dr. Kwan pulled back, her eyes flicking to Ro. This is it. If we can synthesize this into a serum, we might have a chance. Lena's head swam, the fatigue from the process beginning to weigh on her. She could feel the strain of the blood loss starting to take hold, her limbs heavy, but there was no time for weakness. The virus was still out there, still mutating. Ro turned to the monitors, typing commands into the keyboard. The machines whirred to life, working in tandem to analyze Lena's blood. The seconds dragged on like hours, and Lena watched as the data streamed across the screens. Her breath came shallow now, and her body felt as if it was unraveling from the inside out. Then, the screen flashed successful transfer. The room erupted in a quiet cheer. Lena could barely keep her eyes open. The virus would be stopped, she thought, even if she wouldn't be there to see it. Her body was giving in, the strain of the process finally taking its toll. Ro approached her, his voice hoarse. Lena, you did it. Lena managed to faint. Smile, the corners of her mouth trembling as she looked at him. You'll finish it. Humanity will survive.